So grateful to have you on, Gary. You're kind of an OG in the New York tech scene, and I was so glad to see your Orbital membership come to life online. For those that haven't met you, you might have heard of Orbital, which was a co-working space slash incubator slash whatever you want to call it. Now an online community of practice. I knew of you also through the entrepreneurial design class at SVA, aka the 1K challenge, where students had to come up with a product and then actually raise $1,000 for it on Kickstarter. And since we chatted last month about AI in context of the Orbital membership, I just wanted to hear more about that. I found it super interesting and thought other people would like to hear it too. So yeah, maybe we can start there. Maybe walk us through your process. You mentioned using LLMs to code review other LLMs, which I thought was really clever. Anything you want to share about your process at this point?
Yeah. So I started working on this idea for a new Orbital membership early last year. And at the time, I didn't really foresee how much software that I was going to write to support the ritual. And just so folks have a basis for it, it's a really simple concept. The Orbital membership now is really just a quarterly reflection membership. And I designed it for myself. Like I work mostly solo. And when you're solo, it's really easy to get lost in the chaos. And I wanted a forcing function to make myself reflect. And I thought, what better to do than to have a bunch of people that are doing it with me that I am somewhat accountable to in a sense. And so that was the kernel of the small idea. And it builds on a lot of the reflection practices that we used to do back when Orwell had a space. So in building it, though, I think I started maybe about Q1 last year using LLMs to try to think through how I even describe the concept and how to communicate it. Like, what is the value proposition? Am I just saying, hey, I want a bunch of people to reflect with me? That's not quite enough. You have to really think through how to message that. And so I was using LLMs a lot and just trying to think through the myriad of possible ways I could talk about it and building landing page prototypes and then testing those with friends of mine to see whether they resonated, what stuck with them. And that kind of helped me figure out what to prioritize on the messaging. And then once we got it up and running and got people on board, then there was this process of, oh my gosh, now I have to actually make this process work. And that ended up being a bit of stitching things together with Airtable, but then also building a lot of software under the hood to automate the intake of information, automate some of the processing, automating some of the reminders. And fast forward 6 months, I had a full on application that is far larger than any code base that I've put together ever. And it's amazing to see how that's all unfolded. And that was largely built using a variety of different LLMs.
So basically, you were able to create this whole concept and then bring it to people much faster.
Yeah. And then also, whenever you build anything that is user facing versus just an
Hmm.
admin tool for yourself, there's so much surface area of design decisions that you need to make and usability issues that you need to resolve. Just being able to log in, being able to have like settings, being able to have notifications, being able to have a profile, how you edit the profile, what
Hmm.
fields that you can define in that. There's just so much stuff. This is the work, right? It wasn't just the simple quarterly reflection cycle thing. I soon realized, oh my gosh, there's so much more scaffolding that I need to build to actually support an end-to-end experience. Like you've reported a number of bugs, right? Which is great. Your bug reports are excellent.
Thank you.
And so you got to remember, you have to think through these edge cases and test and do all of this stuff. The cost of doing business when you have a user-facing service that people are paying money for, that takes time and energy to go and
Hmm.
spec out, design, and build. And that would have been really maybe not prohibitive, but it would have been a lot more work as a solo person because I'm not the most experienced developer to begin with, too. So there's that aspect too. But being able to have LLMs crank out a lot of the stuff and help you think through all the edge cases and even to prototype different interaction design concepts for a
Hmm.
product you're working on, all of that was like incredibly invaluable.
So were you actually using things like Lovable to do functional UI, or when you say crank out prototypes, what kind of
Oh, so
prototypes do you mean?
I started out trying to use some of the higher level ones like Lovable or V0. They worked fine for initial landing page concepts, but then I realized that I was trying to one shot things too much. And what you really need to do is narrow in the focus of what you're trying to do. So, for example, there was a navigation problem that I had. Like, and to date myself a bit, when I was doing design and product work, designing for mobile was not a thing, right? You're building a web app, like you're not even thinking about the mobile case. And so I realized, oh my gosh, I don't understand what the common paradigms are for how you handle these mobile use cases. So let me just explain the nav problem that I have to Claude. and be like, look, what are some ways that we could resolve this, and go through this process of eliminating some of the ideas, refining some of them. And then I was like, could you build me a prototype of this in React? Because back at that point in time, Claude was proficient at building React UIs in the
Mm-hmm.
panel. So it went and did that. And then that allowed me to play with the UI, see what it looked like at different breakpoints and stuff, and be like, oh, okay, yeah, this
Mm-hmm.
is it. This is what I want. And then once we had that model, then I could say, okay, now I want to bring this into the code base. How do I actually then implement this to hook into everything? If you
Yeah.
take that whole process of what I described, there was a way that you would do this, like in a team scenario, right? You'd go to lunch with your designer, your product person, talk through the issue, maybe rope in an engineer to like think through some of the options and stuff like that. Then maybe they can make some time to hammer out a prototype while they're still working on feature stuff. There's so much friction in just getting to the state of, can I see it and can I play with it and see how it feels?
Right.
This just accelerated that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, in your personal solo practice of using it, where do you find that you trust it and you don't trust it? Where does it feel risky and, oh, it's going to generate something that looks real but is full of errors or things that look like facts but are not facts?
Yeah, I would definitely say that there's this period of way too drunk on the quick iterations. You feel like, oh my gosh, there's this magic happening, and oh, this is the best thing in the world. And then you go
Mm-hmm.
test it, and people are like, I have no idea what you're talking about here. So the first bump for me was on like thinking about how to describe the orbital membership. And this was in the context of designing a marketing landing page. And I was finding these terms that played to my own intellectualization of what I loved about the idea, but made no sense to a layperson. And it's the classic flaw of, you can design for yourself to a degree, but you still have to test, right? You still have to put in front of users. You still have to see how they react. And you can't replace that with LLMs at all. The judgment stuff, I think over time, what I've learned is that the judgment stuff is not what I rely on it for. I work very generatively. So a lot of times it's just really helpful to have a thing. That's the whole concept of prototyping, right? Have something that you can react to, you see how it feels, and then you go from there. I have found that over time, as you start to work with it in the non-coding use cases, you start to work with it and you see when it lets you down, you build up a little bit more of a muscle memory around
Mm-hmm.
what you should or shouldn't be using it for. And that has evolved and changed a bit because the models have gotten way better than they were even 6 or 12 months ago. And so the capabilities are changing. There's this adage of, it's this extremely capable coworker who just does not volunteer information on their own to be helpful, but always have a reply to something that you ask it, whether that reply is exactly what you need or not.
It does to me seem like almost like a thesaurus where it's giving you things that aren't even necessarily on track, but they're somehow related. It's something I saw this week about, yeah, it makes us faster, but yeah, it makes us worse at that task. So with strategy and writing and those sorts of things, I'm curious if you feel like now I'm not actually using that muscle anymore.
I think for me, I think the writing side of it that has been helpful has been the ability to get through iterations faster,
Mhm.
even though the quality of those iterations is worse. For me, for a lot of the work that I've done, I've found that the trade off of being able to go through 50 quick iterations has actually been better than going through three really slow iterations that were probably higher quality. And a lot of that pertains to a lot of the work that I'm doing. I'm pursuing questions where I really don't know what the right answer is. So I think it's really great for those unknowns where you just need something to react to, and you get something to react to and you're like, oh, that's totally not what I wanted to say. And just that clue actually helps you get closer to what you actually are trying to articulate. So it's a little bit of a pinball model of trying to work through your ideas. And I think it works for some folks. I think other folks, their process is a very different one, and this might not actually play into it as well.
Yeah. So, any other tactical tips or things that have been on your mind, stuff that's helped in your process?
So prior to this, the last time I'd been on a team that shipped software was like the early 2000s, right? It's been a long time. There's two kind of responses to that. I think one has been that I'm relying so much on the process lessons for how you work within a team to resolve issues and to come up with solutions. So much so that I'll sometimes even have the LLMs role play different roles, or I'll think about breaking things up into steps in that manner. So I think having a background and understanding of how you actually work on a problem with teams is pretty crucial to learning how to leverage LLMs. I think it's one thing. I think the other thing that has been fascinating for me is I have this mental model in my career where once you move on from a job, like a lot of the skills that you developed at that point, they're just part of that job, and you move on to a different job and you gain a different set of skills, or you develop a new set of skills, but you rarely go back to the ones that you had started with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been really wild for me. And I think my brain has broke multiple times over this process of just finding that those skills from when I was in my 20s and early 30s are actually very relevant to using these systems today. And so it's that part has been really fascinating. LMs, they're really great at spitting things back to you very quickly, right? That's what they do. And it's too crude and powerful of a tool. You really have to shape your usage of it. And it helps to have a framework for how you would resolve things in a team scenario to fall back
Mm-hmm.
on as a framework.
That's great. Those are both super helpful points. And it's funny because the second one, I feel like I'm sometimes the reverse of dragging my skills forward. Look at these skills I have. I need to use them. And it's sometimes hard to let go of them.
The production stuff goes away a little bit. For example, when I was a PM, the friction was always about, hey, we designed this great feature. How come engineering can't build it the way that we wanted to? That's a classic issue. What this process has forced is I'm now confronted with the engineering trade-offs at the same time that I am thinking through the
Mm.
design. On the one hand, you could say, oh, that's really bad. You should still be free to design what you want. But I think that's a little bit of a purist mindset. And I think that's allowing me to do a better job of, hey, do I really want to spend all of my time thinking about registration, or do I want to spend all of my time thinking about the ritual design? Right. And I can make appropriate, energy trade-offs of my own. Also thinking about how many iterations I want to do on each, right? I can make better decisions, and I can also make better
Hmm.
trade-offs because I'm thinking about the whole thing at once.
That's funny. That collapse is exactly what you were doing with the 1K challenge of, hey, you have to think about the market at the same time you're designing the product. Bring that
They go
together
to
sooner.
Yeah, they go together. And I think that
Yeah.
there's this industrialized model of working, which has led to an industrialized model of education where we're
Mhm.
all going to do our role, and then we're going to put it together. But then I'm only going to do this one little piece. And
Right.
that works when you're thinking about things at a very large scale. But when you're just building something of your own, those things need to collapse. And I think that's where, with the Orbital membership software, I still have to make trade offs. I still have to be able to ship. People still have to feel like they're getting value out of the thing. Those fundamental kind of truths, they don't go away because of
Hmm.
this stuff.
Yeah. So back to the point about allowing the LLM to role play these different collaborators, and you have the baseline of knowing a process to work with those types of roles. I'm curious about what's happening as we replace collaborators with LLMs. I'm reading Richard Feynman's autobiography again, and he's talking about some of the development of computing where they're splitting things into separate sequences makes everything much faster, right? Rather than having one person do it all. And we got specialists and handoffs, and now we're collapsing it all of no, let's have one person do it all. So I've heard teachers reporting that their classes, Discords, or
Mm.
Slacks are quieter because people don't want to look stupid. They want to just ask the LLM. I'm curious about these second order effects of
Yeah.
replacing humans.
Yeah. It's a hard time to be a teacher. I think it's a hard time to be doing a lot of things that require large groups of people. And maybe that's why I've designed my life to not function in that manner, because I'm mostly working solo and within small teams. I think on the collaboration side, it does not replace dialogue, and it doesn't replace the time that you need to reflect and have things sit with you. Like, it's 1 o'clock right now, and I have not engaged with any of the LLM related work that I've been doing because I've just been cleaning my apartment and also just letting my brain decompress a bit from a fairly intense period of thinking and working. Those are maybe the human aspects that are still pertinent, right? You
Mhm.
need to be able to decompress, you need to be able to have some distance away from the problem that you're thinking about and not just always be grinding away. Those are all kind of fundamental process truths for myself, and I think for many people too. It's been hard to, keep in mind that this pace that you can have in a chat or using coding agents, you still want to be thoughtful about how you use it. That's a hard kind of balance that we need to think about. In that same way, we're going to have to rewire how we engage with other people, whether they are teammates, clients, collaborators. Maybe there's new generative ways in which people can work together now that the production side is a little bit far removed. Like, maybe for a meeting, everyone comes with a prototype. Maybe you don't need these functional roles to be so siloed anymore. Maybe things can be a lot more flat. Maybe you can redesign how a team is actually structured. It opens up, I think, a lot more creativity in how humans can organize with each other beyond kind of the industrial models that we currently have.
Yeah, I love that. Hopefully, we get to a place where we're just coming to the meetings with more sophisticated visual aids and more integrated ideas, and then still having those dialogues and collaboration moments and testing processes and whatever. I think the other part of things where I've heard a lot of concern is what's it doing to the industry in terms of displacing junior designers, junior engineers? What's it doing to the talent pipeline when we don't have these entry level sort of roles? That ties into the it's a hard time to be a teacher thing of what do we do about younger people trying to get started in these fields?
Yeah, that's a real issue, right? The counter to that potentially is I think there's going to be a lot more business opportunities for smaller teams to pursue things that were previously labor constrained. And that could be either on the side of venture backed businesses that are going to raise a lot of capital to go after these things, or it could be on the side of people building their own bootstrap businesses because they no longer need the financing to be able to go and have the 12 to 18-month runway to build their first V1. There's a lot of things that are now financially viable to pursue. And I think within that, there's a whole lot of learning opportunity that people can get. That's one path. The counter to the other side of the junior argument is that there are still a lot of very experienced senior people that are still adjusting to what this change means. There's a tension for everybody in the labor force, no matter what industry you're in. That's how massive this shift is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot. And I'm also curious about all the changes in personalized education, self-education versus, to your point, industrial models of education. I read one thing about how personalized education kids advance 2 or 3 grades a year
Right.
versus the standard setup. So if you do have young people who are more self-starters and then able to band together with some others and try launching their own business, they will have different types of experience. It's just not necessarily going to be this top-down thing.
It might improve things on one level, but at the same time, they
Yeah.
still need to be able to socialize, learn how to interact with other people. Those developmental skills are still going to have to come through some other mechanism versus school, maybe.
I think I learned the term community of practice through you. I do think it's super important to have that place and group of people that interrupts you and shows you things you wouldn't have seen because you were too busy working and contradicts you. And is it just ChatGPT finally agreeing with you? What are your thoughts about community these days?
I think it's really valuable now, even more so because the state of the public social networks, which is not the warm, fuzzy place it used to be. I used to run community practice not just within the membership for Orbital, but also for leaders in tech, like managers,
Right.
directors, et cetera, which I have not done in a while. And I think that has been partially for a couple of reasons. I think one, the locus of power in terms of how people think about driving their careers, I think is slightly less leadership oriented, which is not to say that leadership is an easier problem. It's not. In fact, it's probably gotten harder. But so much of the attention is still around how to think about leveraging LLMs and AI in the work that you do. So I think the field is just in a different state. I have thought about whether there are like interesting ways to bring things back and connect people. A lot of the fun models or frameworks that we used to use were these live hot seat case study types of scenarios where we'd have maybe about 6 folks who are all from different companies, but at the same level, take turns presenting challenges and then people talk and respond and ask questions about that. And that's been very valuable because I think leaders and organizations are fairly lonely, right? They're confronted with challenging problems that bubble up to whatever leadership level that they're at.
Mhm.
And they can't talk about them necessarily with their teammates because they're there to solve these problems. And so it's really hard to build any kind of sense of feeling like what you're doing, or just even being able to normalize the challenges that you're seeing across the sector without being pulling people together. I'd love to find a way to keep doing that. I think virtual, it's very possible to make things work. I just haven't figured out yet. The thing that I've taken away from the Orbital membership experience is that there's a lot of insight that I have around designing communities of practice that can be improved with software and scaled out. And the membership experience that you're a part of is one example of that. And it's encouraged me to think more about how to continue that realm. Like instead of running programs in person, how could you take those same principles that underlie the program design and codify them in software in a way where they can actually scale and maybe be better in some opportunities? I haven't quite figured that out yet, but it's one of the things on my list of many
Yeah.
projects.
I would love to see how community education and growth and things can be templatized and take shape in different.
Or,
Um,
it doesn't have to be a service that I run, right? Maybe it is software that anyone who wants to start their own community of practice can launch and use. And the rituals and the systems are representative of the underlying tenets. There's a lot of ways to deliver that value to an industry or to a sector without having to be the person that does it, or without that having to be a venture backed business that's supposed to make $1 billion. There's a
yeah.
lot of room in between. And that's where LLMs kind of help on the coding side.
Yeah, as a strategist, I'm like, framework, what's the framework for this? How many people? Who are they? What are the roles? What's the format? I'm always wanting to deconstruct words too. And community is one that gets thrown around a lot. People say, like, the biking community. I'm like, what do you mean? Bikers hate each other. What do you mean when you say community? What are those elements you can identify that create a moment or create an experience? And we have all these connections. Living in New York, you just have hundreds of friends. What does it mean? What is the actual community of taking care of somebody else?
Yeah, sometimes the programs I used to run, they ran 5 or 6 weeks. And a lot of times that was just the momentary lifeboat that those group needed to get them through a period of understanding what leadership looked like in their own role. But they didn't need them to be forever friends. They needed them to come together for that one time. And there was this value from the group, and it was momentary. And those are possible, viable, valuable structures for communities as well. It's just those are very expensive to pull together, right? You have to find the people, filter the people. There's a whole program design that undergirds that. It's a huge production. And then for that reason, I have to charge a certain amount of money, which then means
Right.
that people who don't have a large enough learning and development budget can access that. And then is that really the best model for that type of work to manifest? That has been part of kind of the pause, is also just thinking through a lot of those questions too.
Interesting. So I know you're working on a nonprofit. If you want to share anything about that.
Yeah, so that one's been funny because I'm in the process of designing a nonprofit entity. And that sounds abstract because it is right now. I have an idea for what I want it to do, but they're very legal ideas. They're just non-standard. And so the challenge for me has been, okay, how do I construct this and design this to be something that the IRS is going to see and be like, okay, it's a little bit weird, but it's totally legal. I get it. And we're going to give you a thumbs up. And not being a lawyer myself, the thing that I realized was I could probably take the same approach that I've been taking with using coding CLI tools, where you have a file system and your code app running on top of that, and it can read and write to little tiny files on your computer. And I basically recreated a similar project structure, and I check all the files into GitHub. So I have some version control. And in lieu of having to point this API documentation, if this were software, I downloaded the relevant part of the IRS tax code. And so then the coding agents are referencing the actual tax code as I'm prompting it and asking it, can I do this? What happens if I do this? What are the issues around this? If I design it this way, does this conflict with this other thing? And it's been a very educational process that I think has gone a lot faster than it would have if I were paying a lawyer to sit with me and whiteboard 1,000 scenarios around this complicated thing that I'm trying to figure out. That just would not be financially viable in a pre LLM world. But at least in this case, I can actually get to something where I can make some well-educated decisions and then have something that I can then show a lawyer and be like, hey, this is what I came up with. Does this work or not? And that whole process would be just a fraction of the time and a fraction of the cost. The thing that I'm most excited about is just as an individual, if you have an idea, you have access to this tool that lets you get way farther with a lot less capital than you would otherwise need to. And that creates a lot of potential for new and interesting ideas to emerge from that. That will,
Yeah. It makes me think the whole design thinking process of bringing in subject matter experts and we interview them, we take the notes, and then we try to remember to refer to the notes later. This is like a dynamic, decent subject matter expert. And then to your point, you always have to fact check. That's like the new most important step with all the LLM work. So yeah, that's super interesting. There's a lot of more complex business ideas that people could get started with where there would have been a barrier before.
yeah, just one last thought on this. I think Google was the one that piloted this or pioneered this idea where the legal team actually sat with the product managers And that allowed the PMs to really think through, hey, if we did this, would this work? Or what are the issues around this? And the lawyers weren't providing like compliance advice. They were actually partnering with the PM to really think through the design of the feature with their understanding of what the laws were. And that pairing, you asked about collaboration earlier. Most people don't work at a Google where they have a legal team that can actually go and do that and has established a practice around that. And so if you don't have that access, it limits the things that you can create as a result. And I think that's the one thing that is coming from using LLMs is it has access to a lot of information that may be sketchy and not quite exactly 100% accurate, but you can get a lot farther with that than you could if you didn't have that otherwise. And I think that is going to be really interesting to see what people create out of that.
Cool. Is there anything else if people want to follow along with what you're doing?
Yeah, I have a blog, just garychou.com.
Okay.
I don't publish a lot to it, but that's probably the best way to follow along and see what new weird things that I do. And if people are interested in joining a quarterly reflection practice, they can go to Orbital NYC and they'll find information on the membership there.
Yeah. And I'll plus one that as a valuable tool in your development. Okay. This was great. Thanks so much. Good to see you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me,
Okay.
Erica.